Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus, His church, and the spiritual battle that surrounds us. I'm Craig Allison, and I'll be your host. Okay, listen up everyone. I am so honored to have Mr. Joe Bray and his beautiful wife, Ollie, joining me today to discuss ways in which Christians can navigate and work through all the racial tensions plaguing our world today. I'm especially excited because if you've been listening to these episodes, you'll remember that about 2 weeks ago, I sat down with Dr. Eric Garner to discuss the same thing. Now, Eric brought a perspective of a younger generation, and it was an incredible conversation to take part in. However, after it was done, I began getting emails from people that were eager to hear more, and if possible, to have a similar conversation with someone from an older generation that might have dealt with racism during a time when it was more open, more acceptable, more common. That's why I've got this couple here with me. And let me tell you something about Joe and Ollie. They are two pillars in my life. So I'm the song leader at Central, and I don't recall really of a Sunday where we've been worshiping together that Joe has not made a comment or come up to me after and encouraged me and just been. He's like a modern day Barnabas, and to fully express what that means in my life, I just don't know that there's actual words that can express that in the way that I would like to express it. Just an absolute pillar in my life. A godly man, a great example. Ollie, me and Ollie have a unique relationship. I don't think there's been a serious moment between the two of us. She and I, we kid back and forth, but for those of you that have not met Ollie and gotten to know her, you are missing one of the great pleasures in life. Ollie is, she's a hysterical, lovely woman, just absolutely beautiful. Joe, I don't know how you won her over. She's obviously out of your league. So, the saying, you married up, right? You married up, Joe. But she is, Ollie is full of joy and laughter. And so I think that the perspective that the two of these people bring are going to be not only beneficial for those of you that are listening, but it's a needed conversation. We need to be talking about this as Christians, as family. So I hope this podcast is going to be an encouragement to you. And so sit back wherever you're at and just try to listen with an open heart and an open mind. Joe, Ollie, welcome to the podcast. How are y'all doing today?
Doing great.
Doing good.
Okay, so I told Ollie we weren't going to talk about age, but the listeners kind of need to know from a generational standpoint. You guys were brought up in a time when this whole idea of racism wasn't maybe even called that per se. It was just part of the natural way things were. It's just how the world operated at that time, and maybe there were some questions off on the side rooms and stuff like that, but for the most part it was just something you had to deal with. And am I correct in making that assumption?
Yes, you are. I grew up where segregation was an accepted thing. I can remember my parents, as I got older, telling me if I'll stay in my place, I'd be safe.
Mm-hmm.
And to put a perspective on that, in our hometown, when we got our first Dairy Queen, there were 3 windows. And I'll use the word white and black just for the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
2 windows were for white and 1 was for black.
Mm-hmm.
And we could go to the black window, and if a white person came up, they stopped serving us and served them, and we got served last. So it is a different picture now. My children and grandchildren has a problem understanding how it was because they are only used to what things are today.
Okay. Ollie, you were telling me a story just a little bit ago about, when you were a younger child playing with some children. Do you mind retelling that story?
I was raised by my aunt to a certain age, and she worked for some white people. She was a maid, and she took me to work with her, because there was nowhere to leave me, so I would go to work with her. And they had a little boy, and he was, I guess, around the same age I was, maybe 5 or 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And usually the daddy would be gone to work or gone somewhere, and my aunt would be in there cleaning. We would be outside playing. So this particular day, just so happened he was at home. So we was outside playing, having a good time, and just enjoying ourselves because there was no color barrier.
Right, right.
We was just two kids. And he came to the door, and he almost had a fit. And he called him and made him come in the house, told him that he couldn't stay out there and play with me, which he didn't say me. He used the N-word. So.
Mm-hmm.
Me being a child, I did not understand, because I did not know, why he called him in. We were just playing.
Right.
We wasn't doing anything wrong. And he made him go inside, and I couldn't figure that out. So I asked my aunt, and I told her, and I asked her what happened. And she explained as best she could. She did not go into detail, because I guess she figured I was too young to understand anyway. So.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, when I go to work with her, I was right there with her.
And I hear these stories, and they're things that, intellectually, we know that type of thing existed, but for the generation today, these are things that overt racism. It's especially coming from a white perspective, hard to grasp that type of thing actually was happening to people that I know, that had to deal with that type of thing. And I can't imagine, from the standpoint of being a child. And you and I, Ollie, we were talking earlier about, these things get taught at home,
Mm-hmm.
and they get cemented in. For a child to be taught these things at a young age, it's almost like once, before they're 5 years old, if that type of prejudice is instilled in them, trying to uninstall, to use today's terminology,
Mm-hmm.
To uninstall that racial feelings towards another race is really difficult to do. And so I think that was a point that is definitely worth our discussion. Speaking of which, you all coming from a generation that was dealing with this, have you ever been asked to sit down with a white person in person and talk about racism in the open, no holding back in any kind of way?
Not really. We have talked about current issues over the years, what's going on and things like that, but we never sat down to talk about it and try to find a solution to the problem, what we could do, and to make it better. I will say this: during this time when we mentioned that segregation was a way of life,
Mm-hmm.
my grandmother, she worked for white people. She washed their clothes and things like that. And they were Christians. And they got a black preacher to come into that city and hold a gospel meeting, and my grandmother were baptized. Thus, the black church in the city, and that's Jackson, Tennessee, began with her. And today, when I look back to that situation, they had enough interest in her soul that they did reach out to help in a Christian way. But we had a black church and we had a white church. That's the way it was. And as growing up, I can remember we could not go to their church, but when we had a gospel meeting and somebody that they wanted to hear, the white people would come to our meetings and listen. I wondered about that, and I would talk to my mom and dad about that, and they would say, well, that's just the way it is. And so I accepted that. That was my answer given to me. For that.
That's an interesting observation. That, I'm trying not to spin things negatively, but it's difficult for me as a younger. I'm not too young, but as a younger white man, and I've seen a lot. I've lived in several places, but to sit here and have a casual conversation about we care enough about you to preach the word to you and preach salvation to you, but we're not going to be in the same church with you. We're not going to sit on the same pew with you. That to me is just those two things don't really fit. They don't go together. So interesting observation, since you brought up the churches. The two of you attend Central Church of Christ.
Correct.
Predominantly white. Eric and I talked about this whole black church, white church thing, and he made some good points. He said their church in Avondale is reaching out to their neighborhood, to their community, which is predominantly about black. So you would expect that the majority of the membership there would portray that neighborhood in that area. You all come and attend and worship at Central, which is a predominantly white church. How does that feel? I've never asked you guys that question, but I think I'd be interested in knowing. The decision-making process. Why Central? Why not another church that is predominantly black?
I think today that we don't look predominantly at black and white, church. We are all God's children, and we feel that we are treated as equal as you and any other white person there. I'm like, when I was 5 years old, there was no color bearer, and like a lot of kids today, that haven't been raised in that.
Right.
We don't see color. When I look at you, I don't look at you being a white man. I mean, I know you're a white man, but I don't look at that.
Right.
I guess I'm going to compare myself with Jesus. I look on the inside. Yeah. So.
And I think you are one of the rare minorities that have the ability to do that. And I don't use the term being colorblind, because obviously you can't look at a person and not see the color of their skin.
Exactly.
But it shouldn't matter. I understand the argument behind there, but looking at a person and you all being blessed with more melanin than I have, I can't judge you because you have more of it, and you shouldn't judge me because I got a lesser amount of it. It's just a skin pigmentation. But that's where we are today. That's why we're here, is because of the atrocities that were perpetrated against people simply because they were they had more skin pigmentation than white people, and so we're dealing with the consequences of atrocities, of sin. Right? That's what this boils down to. So I appreciate that, Ollie, that you're able to see, I think, how God and Jesus expect us to look at our fellow brothers and sisters inside, to the heart.
Yes.
Yeah. So just to get kind of an understanding, what was it like for the two of you growing up during a time when this type of conversation, this just wouldn't have happened? What was life like back then for the two of you?
I think that Joe was more, I, I guess I could say, out there than what I was. I was sort of, I guess, shielded from some of it, because I wasn't out there like he was.
Mm-hmm.
He was kind of in the middle of it, and because he can talk to you better about that than me.
It was, well, we just lived and didn't think about it. I mean, it was way of life, and at that point, we didn't think about changing it or that it would change. Give an example. I worked for an automobile dealership. They sold cars, and one day the owner of the company called me to his office, and I thought he's getting ready to fire me. And he told me he wanted to make me assistant manager for the parts department. He said, it's not going to be easy, but if you'll hang in there, you'll succeed. I knew a little bit about the parts department and things was going on. I accepted the position. All of the other dealerships in the city called him and told him he'd made a great mistake. And he called me to his office and told me what everybody was saying about me. And he said, don't listen to it, do your job, and you'll be okay. And one day, the parts manager, who was white, was away. We had one of our, I guess, our most biggest customer came in and needed some emergency parts. He needed them overnight. And he asked for the manager, and I told him he's gone home. And he told me what his problem was. And I said, well, he's not here. And before that, he would never let me wait on him. So he said this to me: if you think that you can get these parts in for me, I'll give the list to you. I asked him what did he need. He told me. I had him shipped in from Memphis, Tennessee to Jackson, picked him up at the bus station the next morning, took him to his shop. He opened the box and he said, I want to see if you messed it up. He looked in there and everything was good. And from that day on, I was a person he would come to for his parts. And my manager and the owner of the company told me, I told you if you would do the right thing, things would change. And I said that to say this. I think we draw conclusions because we don't know who the person is. We don't look at the inside. We don't look at their ability. Mm-hmm. We look at the color content and we have our mind made up and nothing happens. And until we interact, it's when we realize who we are, that we all are the same.
So, in y'all's opinion, and one of the reasons I wanted to have y'all on this podcast is because you have a broader perspective than most people I could talk to. Growing up during a time when civil rights was a thing, we're going back now to the 50s and the 60s, and y'all can recall these times. I mean, this is times that y'all were living in versus where we're at today. Are we making any progress? Are we getting better, or are we going backwards?
I think some progress has been made, probably not enough. But I think the thing that I see from the 50s and 60s into the 70s is that we have gone through an educational process. Back in the 50s and 60s, there were segregated schools, but the fact today that we are do have integrated schools, we at an early age, get to know a little bit about what the other person is and what he's all about. And I think that has helped a lot. And I think if we did a little more talking with each other and trying to see where we are and what's going on, I think we would gain a lot more and be further along than we are right now.
Yeah. Ollie, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that we have made some progress, not nearly enough. We should be further along, but we're not. I think that the thing that's happening now with our children, talking to them and trying to get them to understand something that should have been done years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, they was instilled in this prejudice stuff, like, we're white, they're black,
Mm-hmm.
we're better than they are,
Mm-hmm.
But now, there's still some, because I know there's still some bad apples and some good apples out there.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some that's trying, and I do mean doing their best to try to instill in their children the right way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And with their help, and it's got to come from home first, because this teaching comes from home first.
Yeah.
And then with the schools, the teachers and things, backing it up
Yeah.
and helping them. Then I don't know if we'll ever make it all the way. I don't know. I can't answer that. I don't know, but it's been a slow process. Wait and see.
I'm curious to know too, and I don't want to get too divergent here, but thinking about, schools started cracking down on removing prayer from school, removing God from school, and from a you have this one train that's going forward, that is the physical life and all the things that are part of that, the skin color and everything like that. And then you have this other train that's moving along with it, that is faith, spirituality, Christianity, all of these things. Mm-hmm. And there is this, hopefully a sense that as these trains are moving, they're getting closer and closer together, where at some point, they're able to merge and we begin to see past the skin, past the color, past all of these things. Mm-hmm. And, within the learning system, from an educational system, you teach it at home, it gets reinforced at school. Well, all of a sudden, at some point back in the, 70s, that spirituality train got taken completely off the track.
Right.
And so now you have, it's like 2 steps forward and 2 steps back, or 1 step back. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to know if y'all think that this whole race thing has been slowed down. We haven't progressed as far as we need to progress, not because of people being racist, but because people took God away from the conversation. They took him out of the schools, and discipline and all of that kind of stuff began to just fall apart, basically. Thoughts or comments on that?
I think we have digressed because of the fact that we removed prayer and Bible reading in school. Some of the kids, perhaps the only spiritual thing that they had connection with was that devotional every morning, 5 days a week. And they had something going for them. And I see today, I can remember when I went to school, we didn't have to have a resource officer in our school building. We didn't need them. If something went wrong with a child and the child didn't obey, the teacher gave that child a note, and they took that note home to their parent, and they took care of it. The next day, we act better. Mm-hmm. Prayer and scripture reading, when I was in high school, every Friday afternoon, we had a whole hour of a devotional.
Did you go to a Christian school?
No, it was a secular school, county school.
Oh, okay.
And our principal would say, I won't see you all until Monday. There'll be 2 days. We won't see each other. I want to strengthen you so you can get through the weekend and be back here Monday morning. So having taken prayer and Bible reading and all that out of school, to get through each day, we have to have a police officer in the school to get through it. And I believe it is a direct result of getting rid of the religious activity that we had going on to help us strengthen ourselves.
You know, we talk about these, it seems like back when y'all were in school, there were, yes, racism was a thing for sure, but there was a, you know, not that everybody followed it, but there was a foundation there of moral objectivity. Morality, it wasn't a subjective thing. There were just, you know, like you said, you're there at school. You had on Fridays. That's why I asked you, was that a Christian school? Because that, you know, to know that was coming from a public school is an odd thing. But that just goes to show that society still had the inclination to answer to a higher power. That there was a moral absolute there with God. And that transcended everything. And I just wonder, had we kept that in place, if today we wouldn't be so much further along. Because when we removed that moral absolute, when we removed God, and now everything becomes subjective, and, you know, I can feel the way I feel. If I want to feel racist, who are you to tell me that I can't feel racist, you know? And so I can't help but wonder if we wouldn't maybe not even be having this conversation if that had stayed intact.
Probably not. I want to add something else to that. During these devotion, the last spanking that I got in school, and I was a good boy, but the last spanking I got in school, I was acting up, kidding around in devotion, and the principal had me to come to his office, and he gave me 10 spanking of 10 licks. He sent a note by me to my parents and said, Joe was acting up in devotion today. I did give him a spanking. I just wanted you all to know. My dad wasn't happy. And of course I got another one. I didn't act up anymore. So I think that, and his reason was, and what Mom and Dad told me, you are not just in school when you're in devotion, you're dealing with God. God sees that. And I think if we had more people today who believe that God is seeing and know what they are doing and they respect God, they would go after things in a different way.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Joe, for sure. So, switch gears just a little bit here and ask you, and Eric and I talked about this too, and I'd like to get y'all's perspective on it as well. What can the white community, what can me as a white male, and I'll put it like this, what do we need to stop doing? What do we need to start doing? And what do we need to continue doing? From y'all's perspective, you know, as you look and you see all of this stuff going on, and you've got, you know, these, we may get into like the whole white privilege thing, but, you know, as I watch the news and I see the majority of these protesters are these young white college girls who have not lived, you know, a whole lot of life, and it seems like that's the thing they need to do. They need to be going out there and making a lot of noise and marching, and I mean, that may be great and it may be good. Is it lasting? Is it helping? What is y'all's take on that?
Maybe we have looked at what white need to do. I think if we start looking at this, what we, white and black, need to do together, When I think about the white man or white people need to do this or that for us, I think I am somehow copping out and trying to relieve myself of personal responsibility. I think what we need to do is white and black, we get together and we talk about it. See where we can meet in the middle of the road or halfway, and how we can continue to walk along and grow together and correcting some of the problems that we both realize that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do that, I believe it would go a lot farther and last a lot longer than if you do it or I do it. We need to do this together.
And my problem is it's easy for us Christians,
Mm-hmm.
but how do we get the other people that are out there, to do the same?
Yeah.
Those are the ones that we need to wheel in.
Yeah.
And so, how do we go about doing that?
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't. I don't have the answers to that. Joe, you brought up an interesting point, this personal responsibility and taking, and Eric brought this out too. He's like, don't apologize for being white. He said, you can't decide that, you had no say in the matter. You were born into a place, so don't apologize for being white, but don't look down on the people that are not as privileged as you are, that don't have the blessings that you do. Don't judge them. And I think that's a really a good place to start if we can get that point across to more and more people. Kind of going along those lines, and there's this. I'm struggling to wrap my brain around, and don't get me wrong. I think this is a good thing. It's a cultural ethnicity mindset that the black community shares, as a, if it happens to one person, it's happened to all of us. It's this shared sense of cultural community. I don't know if I'm explaining this well. We don't have that, and I don't know exactly why. Maybe we're just rogue individuals. It's all about what can I do by myself, and I don't need anybody else, and the whole cowboy type thing. And I'm curious to know how taking those two very different mindsets, where the black community has like a shared sense of purpose, a cultural, if it happens to one, you all feel it. It's all, an insult is not an insult to one person, it's an insult to everybody. Somebody comes up and insults me, and I can have 20 white guys standing and they're going to laugh. They don't care. I'm out there on my own, basically. So how do we move together with such a different cultural appreciation, I guess, for a race? Does that make sense? Am I?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I think trust, and I think one of the reasons that our relationship, black on black, is different. We have grown up with a sense of responsibility of being there for each other. And maybe at a time that was really needed, it's still needed, but I think in a different way than from the pre-segregation era. Today, I believe that we can get along with each other. We can be there for each other. And I have to consider you as a white man, you're going through some of the same things that I'm going through, maybe in a little different way, but this world doesn't care any more about you than it does me. I mean, as a world standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And I should be as eager to come to your rescue as I would to another black person rescued.
We experience everything that I just jumbled up trying to explain. The difference between black culture and white culture. You have a stronger sense of community, I guess is the simplest way to put it. We have that in the church. As a white man, I get to experience that sense of belonging within the church. Doesn't matter, black, white, yellow, green. I mean, we are a family, a unified body in Christ, and that's something that I think that the world needs, and that the world needs to see that what they're searching and seeking for so hard exist within the church, and we have an example of it. That sense of belonging, that sense of unity, family, whatever you want to call it, that as a white man looking into the black community, I see that existing. Now, it may not be perfect, it may not be just like the church, but it's that sense of community that is there, where in today's world, it's just, you see so many that don't have that are struggling with it. So I not sure if I'm making sense on that. It's from y'all's standpoint, being in a church, is that something that you see that is like, oh, this is like being raised in the black community? We stood up for each other. We had that, and now, however many years later, in this church, I experienced that same thing, but within a church setting, not a black community setting.
Well, we have been fortunate, I think, in that area. For the last 20 years, we have worshiped in a predominantly white church. When we worshiped at Brainerd Road, we were part of that family. Mm-hmm. And that is what we were looking for. And when we came to Central, we found that. And we still feel part of the family there. We're part of the church. That's the way we're treated. That's the way we approach it. And that's the way the congregation of people treat us and approach us. So I know maybe in some areas it may not be the same, but at Central, we're Christian. Mm-hmm. We're members of the Central Church, we're members of the congregation, and we don't think anything. We don't have any other thoughts. We walk in, we worship, we work, we do whatever we got to do together, and we leave. And that's what we had when we were at a predominantly black church. We looked after each other, and we were there for each other, and I feel the same way where we are now.
We spoke a few minutes ago about, the black seeming to be together and the white not being all together. And I think that's because of the treatment over the years, mm-hmm. So, and I won't say they, I say we, even though I wasn't back there doing slavery and on up through there, but during that time and on up, whatever happened to this black person, yes, it was like it happened to this black person, because it was like we were the one that was being stomped on. Mm-hmm. And now they have signs out, Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's because it's going back to all of this. Mm-hmm. But now, as you mentioned about church and feeling like we have this family that's different from the family that, we just close together with the blacks. All lives matter, mm-hmm. Not just the black, but all lives matter.
That makes me think, too, of, anytime a culture, a race, whatever, a group of people come under persecution, and we look at the first century church, they were growing. During that time of persecution, they were expanding, and they, I see that as probably a similar situation where the blacks were being put into slavery and persecuted, and they joined together in a time of tragedy and had that unity. And what's the takeaway for us today as Christians? Maybe we're entering a time where the church is going to be under persecution. And it may be that through tragedy, through something bad, racism finally disappears because black, white, everybody has to join together as God's church, as Christ's church, and stick together during the time of persecution. So I don't know, just a random observation, but made me think of that, Ollie, with what you just said. What about you, Joe? Any final?
I think you're true, and I think some of the things we go through or going through today, it gives us an opportunity, as bad as some of the situations are, to stop and to think, we need God. I can't solve this problem by myself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the answer. And as you mentioned about the early church, when they were persecuted and things was happening to them, they got closer to God and they kept growing in numbers. And as they grew, the outside world took notice. And I think if we get on the God's side and stick with Him, and no matter what wrong is going on, do the right, I think the right will come out on top no matter what. And we need to concentrate on that. And I think some of these things that we're going through probably wouldn't be if we had more people trusting in God and instead of themselves.
Excellent point. Joe, Ollie, thank you so much for sharing what I feel like is a much needed perspective with me today. It's been an absolute privilege for me. So thank you for joining me today on this podcast. Hey everyone, remember this. There comes a time in life when it's wise to stop talking and just listen. Listen with the intent to understand. Because I think we sometimes confuse understanding with agreement these days, and that in itself has become a divisive thing. We seem to have forgotten how to have different opinions about any issues, and still remain friends, respecting and loving one another. So my plea is for everyone to stop and listen more, talk less, but above all, never lose sight of the fact that we are all God's children, and we all have an eternal soul that transcends the color of our outward flesh. My final thoughts, Proverbs chapter 17, verse 28. Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent. Folks, as always, be kind to one another, be patient with one another, love without condition. Until our next episode, this is Craig Allison with The Lion, the Way, and the War. Have a blessed week.